It's a well-known fact that in economies where planned development takes place, there has to be a plan, and the projects become part of the plan process. So there is this classic question of whether projects form plan or plan gets formed out of projects. Projects are primarily designed for achieving certain objectives, which are often related to the broader objectives of the economy. And this is something which we are all familiar with as far as the Indian planning process is concerned. Currently, we are in the process of structuring the third five-year plan, starting from 2012, which will go on for 5 years up to 2017. So, project appraisal within the national parameters which are determined exogenously. That's how the entire process of project planning takes place. This is what Little and Middle stated as early as 1974. And when the UNIDO also looked at projects, that's how they specified this approach which needs to be taken. So project appraisal essentially presupposes the existence of an overall plan. That's the significance of the plan. And as I said, we have the five-year plan process. And it is this five-year plan process and the annual budgetary process which determines the total availability of resources for various projects to be taken up. And as we are all familiar, the budget process explains what is to be done within the overall plan scheme of things on a year-to-year basis. Other than the budgetary sources, there will be internal and extra budgetary resources which essentially public sector and state entities generate. There could be multilateral assistance coming in, and there could be market borrowings. So these are all the different ways of generating resources for projects to be taken up. And in our Indian context, what is also important is the role being played by the Planning Commission, which is a central body, which is essentially responsible for the plan process, and the various ministries which are allocated business according to the rules of business for the government. And there are levels of decision making like either the cabinet itself or the different cabinet committees as they are mandated. So it is within this larger scheme of things that projects get taken up. And here it will also be relevant to mention about the top-down or the bottom-up process as far as the plan process is concerned. Plan governs projects, and projects become the building blocks of a plan. So this discussion has been going on for quite some time, and one cannot say there is a final answer to what exactly is the process which really governs the system. But it can be concluded that we need projects for a plan, and projects would emerge out of a plan. The World Bank also is a key player as far as the project planning process is concerned. They talk about at the project preparation stage, they also do an analysis of the economic aspects, whether the project can be expected to make a positive contribution to the development objectives of the country. So the point is it has to fit into the larger development objectives of the country as far as projects are concerned. The very process of project planning or the project cycle has considerable significance when we talk about projects, the reasons why projects succeed or fail. When we look at that, we also have to look at what is the entire process of project planning. We all know that projects cannot just come out of from anywhere. It has to be a constant process of identifying what is to be taken up and then going through this entire process of preparation, appraisal, and so on and so on. So the key problem of a large number of developing countries is the scarcity of projects and the lack of a project planning procedure, which appropriately is linked to a development planning framework. So that's one fundamental point we have to take note of. And what we need is a systematic approach to project planning. If that is done, then half the game is won as far as having good projects and success of projects is concerned. This should ideally address problems of project preparation, the design and analysis in general. Then the importance of systematic and comprehensive approach towards project planning needs to be taken note of. There is the more detailed the approach is, the better planned the project would be, and therefore it can more easily succeed. Identification essentially means being part of the national planning process. It is a systematic process which will start with a preconceived idea, and then it's followed by a pre-feasibility report. The next stage in project planning cycle, preparation, which would essentially define the objectives of the project, It would define the effective scope and boundary of a project. It would identify primary and secondary beneficiaries. It would also look at the preliminary design, technical aspects, the technology proposed, the resources required. There will be various such aspects which would get taken note of at this stage of preparation. Once it is prepared, then comes the stage of appraisal. Then comes the stage of appraisal, which is basically financial appraisal or economic appraisal, or it could be even social appraisal. So there are different forms of appraisal, and analysis of risk and uncertainty is something which happens at this stage, and naturally a sensitivity analysis also is taken up. The next phase in project planning would be selection of the project itself after acceptance, which is recommended by the project analyst, then a reconsultation by the planners, that is the decision makers. It may not be enough to have just resources, but various other aspects also would have to be taken into account. Then comes the approval at higher levels in the scheme of things as far as government is concerned. And once it is approved, once it becomes part of the plan scheme and it is incorporated in the 5-year plan scheme or the overall development scheme of the country or the organization, then the stage of implementation comes. There will have to be an implementation plan. There are very many problems which can come up. All those should be anticipated. Effective monitoring should take place. Frequent inspections will be required during the course of implementation. Evaluations will have to take place, and the breakdown of the project itself into various sets of activities. How best this is done, how effectively this is done, and how best these are all looked into at different levels, that would contribute substantially to the success or failure of the project. And once the project is completed, the stage of transition comes. That also should be prepared well in advance, which is the body which will take care of the running of the project of the program as such. And once the project is completed, there is the importance of monitoring and evaluation, monitoring its impacts on society, find out what is the actual value of project to the country, and also get a feedback which will be useful for future work in this area of project planning. Now, in the government, when projects are taken up, what exactly is the decision-making process? For an outsider, it may look very simple, or for an outsider, it may look very complicated the way one looks at it. So what I'm trying to do here is we have a central government, we have state governments. There are subjects distributed to the state government and to the central government. It is accordingly that projects are taken up by the respective organization. We all know that there is a central plan. There are certain subjects according to the constitution which the government of India can directly do, but there are various other subjects which the states are supposed to take up. So such projects in the domain of the states will be taken up at the state level. When you look at the central government level, the ultimate decision-making body is the central cabinet. Various matters have to go to the cabinet. Then there are certain other matters which the cabinet itself can delegate to what is called a cabinet committee. We might have heard of the cabinet committee on infrastructure, the cabinet committee for economic affairs and the like. So in certain cases, the cabinet would delegate certain actions to the cabinet committee, and if the decision is taken at that level, those matters do not go back to the cabinet again. Each ministry has a minister, and minister also has certain powers of deciding up to a certain limit as far as projects are concerned. And in the government process, at least the central government process, any project which is to be taken up will have to go through a process of either a PIB, investment board, or an expenditure finance committee, EFC process. So only when these stages are overcome, a project would ultimately go for a decision to a cabinet level or a cabinet committee level. Then we have the public sector undertakings which have been characterized according to their strength, and their those headings like that, starting with Maharatna, Miniratnas and the like. So different levels of decision making have been delegated to these public sector undertakings also. But broadly, as far as I can recollect, anything above 500 crores, a project which would cost more than 500 crores, would have to go to the government system, the cabinet, even in the case of public sector undertakings. Now, within the government, the arrangement is that the minister himself or herself within the ministry can decide a project up to a size of 150 crore, Anything which is above 150 crore up to 300 crore will be decided by the concerned minister of the ministry plus the finance minister, the two ministers coming. And anything of the size of 300 crores plus would naturally go through the PIV process, and the cabinet or the cabinet committees, if so delegated, would decide on projects which are of the size of 300 crores plus 300 crores and above. There is no limit, anything beyond that. That is the process we have as far as the central government is concerned. Now, as far as the states are concerned, there is a similar process. State cabinet is the ultimate decision-making body as far as the project is concerned. They also have an appraisal process, may not be as rigorous and as rigid as the Government of India process. Then states also advocate the concept of decentralized planning, whereby the district planning committees would have certain powers, or the urban local bodies or the rural bodies would have certain powers. So there is a certain amount of delegation which takes place in each state, so it varies from state to state. But the ultimate process is any major project to be taken up in a state also will go up to the level of the cabinet. Now, what we also need to remember is when we talk about projects, we essentially mostly refer to the public sector, the projects which are taken up by our public sector enterprises. And our public sector is a big entity in our India scheme of things. There are 240 of these public sector enterprises, and they account for 22% of the GDP of the country, and 6% of the total employment is in this public sector. And these public sector entities of the central government contribute something like 20% of the total tax revenues of the government. And again, they are significant, they are major entities and major players in the economic development of the country, because 90% of India's coal is produced by public sector. 65% of refined oil is again produced in the public sector. 83% of natural gas again gets produced in the public sector. So that's why we keep hearing about public sector and the large dominance or presence of the public sector. Another entity like this is the Indian Railways, which employs something like 1.6 million people, and something like 131 projects of the railways are currently on monitor. And there is a system in the Government of India where projects of a certain size are regularly monitored. What is the progress being made? What are the problems? So these 131 projects which belong to the railways, the original cost of these many projects was something like 64,906 crore. And by the time these get completed, the anticipated cost is going to be 1,34,280 crore. So one can see the difference, what has been approved, and by the time the projects get completed, what would be its size. And this could be due to various reasons. And one of the main reasons is the overall cost overrun, which works out to something like 107% as far as the railway projects are concerned. I refer to 131 projects of the railways. 101 of these have cost overrun, and 27 projects have time overrun. So that is to give an idea as to where we stand with regard to the Government of India or the central projects. Now we come to infrastructure projects. There was some ambiguity about what exactly constitutes infrastructure, and we all would have had opportunities of reading about the various discussions which have been happening. One generally makes reference to certain infrastructure sectors, but it's only very recently a definite effort has been made to define what exactly is infrastructure. Otherwise, there was lack of clarity because there were different definitions of infrastructure followed by different related entities. The Reserve Bank of India had a certain way of defining, and credit facility was treated as infrastructure lending if it covered some 12 sectors. For raising ECB, something like 7 sectors were included. Then sometime back in 2001, we had the Rangarajan Commission, which listed 6 characteristics to be considered an infrastructure project. And these 6 characteristics were: there should be a natural monopoly, there should be high sunk costs, there should be non-tradability of the output, there should be non-rivalness in consumption, possibility of price exclusion should be there, and bestowing of externalities. This is the criteria which the Rangarajan Commission gave for defining a project as an infrastructure. Then we have the Income Tax Department, which defines infrastructure for the purpose of Section 81A, and they recognized only 11 sectors as infrastructure. So ultimately now with the approval of the cabinet, we now have a master list on infrastructure which covers 5 main sectors and 29 subsectors. So the ambiguity has substantially been done away with. The plan document, the 5-year plan document also makes a reference, but it basically concentrates on the physical infrastructure. I'm sure we would have come across the midterm appraisal of the 11th plan. That refers to physical infrastructure such as electricity, water supply, roads, transportation, and sewage and sanitation. They also refer to major infrastructure sectors like electricity, roads and bridges, telecom, railways, ports, airports, irrigation, water supply and sanitation, storage, and oil and gas pipelines. So what I'm trying to aim at is to more or less define what is meant by infrastructure projects in our country's scheme of things. And the midterm appraisal again talks about the various policy initiatives which are required to promote private participation in infrastructure projects. There is a committee on infrastructure which is chaired by the Prime Minister that initiates policies. There is a public-private partnership appraisal committee. There is a cabinet committee on infrastructure. There is an empowered committee for viability gap funding, and there is an entity called the India Infrastructure Finance Company which provides long-term loans, and model concession agreements are drawn up by the central government ministries which could become a model for taking up projects in the public-private partnership areas. So when we talk of projects, it's not a straight simple way of looking at a project. In the Indian context, there could be missions, there could be yojanas, there could be programs, there could be projects. Now, Bharat Nirman is, which was launched in 2005, is one such example. It's a big program. It's for upgradation of rural infrastructure, which aims to provide electricity to 1,25,000 villages, connect remaining 66,802 habitations. So it has various components, but it is also taken into account as a project for that sense, but it's essentially a major program. There is the National Rural Health Mission. It's a mission. Similarly, there is the Jawaharlal Nehru National Urban Renewal Mission, which started off as a 50,000 crore program, then upgraded to 66,000 crores, spread over a 7-year period. So what happens is there is a mission at the central level, but it has components of various projects which are taken up in different cities or different villages or different areas. So the title could be either a mission or a yojana, like the Pradhan Mantri Gram Sadak Yojana, or it could be the National Solar Mission, or the Rajiv Gandhi Gramin Vidyutikaran Yojana, or the Rajiv Awas Yojana. So we have different titles like this, which in effect means developmental programs are getting taken up. It's named as a mission or under any of these titles or names. I'm sure many of us would have heard about the dedicated freight corridor project. Then we have this ultra mega power projects, the very large projects. There is the National Highways Development Project. There is an integrated low-cost sanitation scheme. So these are all the different types of the government taking up programs or projects spread out in the country. So it may have a common title, but it will be taken up for implementation in different parts. It could be one single project or a program, or it could be subdivided into various components of projects, depending upon how the implementation is to be taken up. Now, when we talk of infrastructure investments, again, it must be kept in mind that the start of the entire process is from the plan process itself. I refer to the 5-year plan process, and the infrastructure investment over a plan period is indicated in the plan document, and the government tries to achieve those targets. So for the 10th 5-year plan, the infrastructure investment target kept was something like 9,06,074 crore. That was the target kept, of which 25% was to come from the private sector, or 25% came from the private sector. So this means it's a combination of efforts by the public and private sectors as far as infrastructure facilitation in the country is concerned. Then projection for the 11th 5-year plan, which just came to an end, the 11th 5-year plan. The projection made was an investment of 20,50,000 54,205 crore, of which something like 36% the private sector was supposed to chip in. And the plan document itself admitted there are significant shortfalls in sectors like roads, railways, ports, water supply, etc. And when we come to the 12th 5-year plan, which as I said has just started, but the plan document is yet to get finalized, it has to go before the National Development Council. The projection is during the 12th 5-year plan, a total of something like 40,99,000 crore would have to be invested in infrastructure if you have to achieve a share of 9.9% as proportional GDP. So in each plan, the size keeps going up. That means more projects to be taken up. That means more activity at the field level, more of project-related efforts, more of management, and more of efforts to see to it that the objectives set are achieved. When we talk about the implementation of these projects which get approved, as I said, there could be different levels. There could be a central government level arrangement. There could be states which would be doing it. There could be local bodies which would be doing it. So we have to really understand who exactly is mandated and responsible for implementing a particular project or a program. And when we look at the central government, it could be either the ministries themselves running a program, like the Pradhan Mantri Gram Sadak Yojana is run by the Ministry of Rural Development. But there could be projects which are taken up for implementation by the public sector undertakings. So there would be a broad approval from the Government of India, and after that, either the funds are made available through the plan process, or the public sector itself raises the resources, and they are responsible for implementing and completing the project. But what happens is, at the central level, the Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation monitors the progress of implementation of major projects, and it gets deliberated upon on a regular basis. Now, if we take railways as an example, which is a central entity, its outlay for the 11th 5-year plan, the plan period which just came to an end, was 1,94,263 crore rupees. I mean, that's the size of investment which the railways were supposed to make during the 11th 5-year plan, and that is subdivided into various projects or programs like having new lines laid, a target of 2,000 kilometers, having gauge conversion, a target of 10,000 kilometers, electrification projects, 3,500 of them, wagons to be added, 1,55,000. So all these become components of the project as far as the railways are concerned. And of the amount I referred to, 1,94,263 crore, what is provided from out of the budget is something like 44,260 crore, and the railways themselves are supposed to generate something like 1,50,000 crore. So there is an onus on the railways to generate resources for taking up new projects, whereas the support from the budget itself is not that huge as what they are supposed to raise. But in the case of certain other ministries like the Jawaharlal Nehru Urban Renewal Mission or any other program, a substantial amount comes from the budgetary process, with states chipping in where the states are supposed to, and that leads to a situation where a joint action is initiated when the states are involved. So that's one way of doing things when the central government initiates a program. Then the states left to themselves would have large number of projects taken up within the mandate they are given. Say, for example, an irrigation project, or within the power sector where they take up projects, there will be projects taken up at their level. So there again, either the state ministries or departments would be responsible for implementing them, or it could be through the state public sector undertakings which will be doing such projects, or there could be separate agencies set up in the states which would handle such projects. And then, as I said, there could be a centrally sponsored scheme where part of the funds or substantial part of the funds come from Government of India, and a certain part would be chipped in by the state government. So it's a joint way of implementing, and there could be states' own projects or programs which would be taken up by the state through a decision-making process at the state cabinet level. Then the local bodies also could take up some projects within their resources. If they have enough resources, they could take up some of the projects at their end. Of course, there will be projects which would come from either the Government of India level or the state level, but at their own level also they can take up projects depending upon the resources they generate. So we can see a huge array of different types of projects and programs which are taken up for implementation. So what is important is to understand who exactly is the approval authority, where exactly is the fund flowing from, and that makes a significant difference because if we take the example of the states, in the case of a centrally sponsored scheme, the center would release funds only when a certain level of utilization is reached by the states. So only when the state sends a utilization certificate saying that this percentage of the total funds already released to us has already been spent, only when that reaches the central government, further releases will take place, because normally the releases do not take place in one single installment. That's the way of centers' way of monitoring or controlling that the project gets implemented fully. So there are linkages like this, and sometimes when we see delays as far as some projects are concerned, these are the reasons or some of the prominent reasons which lead to delays. If the state has not been able to honor its word, then there will be a delay forthcoming. As a result of that, the central release would get that much delayed. The state may not have that type of resources to anticipate centers allocation and then spend it. Similarly, at the local body level, also if the state has promised to provide certain funds for X or Y project, and most of it or whole of it has to come from the state, there will be certain conditions which would have to be met. Only when those conditions are met, the funds would continue to flow to the local bodies. So this is the linkage which we have to keep in mind when we think of projects and when we look at how it is implemented. The process of implementation of these projects. Now we have covered how the projects are taken up, how they get approved, and how they become part of the overall developmental plan scheme as far as the country is concerned. Now the implementation process, instead of going into the details of that, I'm straight away trying to list some of the reasons which often get mentioned as far as what goes wrong with the implementation. Now, in this scheme of things, we notice that either the central government or the state government approves projects. Quite often what happens is the entity which proposes a project to be taken up, that entity itself is asked to implement the project also. So it's not always normal that when a project is approved, a complement of staff also gets approved. It does not essentially mean that a project approved means a complement of 1,000 people would be positioned or 50 people would be positioned only for that project. So quite often what happens is the same public sector or the same department or the same agency takes up implementation of the project as an additional activity. Depending upon what they are supposed to do, this could be a major activity or this could be one among the various activities which they are implementing. So there is this problem about implementation also entrusted to the same agency. Then quite often what happens is this is an add-on burden to the concerned department or the entity or the agency. One more project is assigned to them, you do this as well along with the various other jobs which are doing. This raises issues regarding accountability, and accountability has various other parts also, in the sense that the functionary may get shifted, someone who is heading it may get promoted or may retire or may leave the place. So there are accountability issues. In government projects, basically what happens is the implementation process goes on. It's very rarely that individuals or heads are held accountable for completing a project or being fully responsible for the project. And then we look at the decision-making process. It's quite often very centralized in the governmental scheme of things. Now, even when a project has to meet the requirement of cost escalation, beyond a certain limit, it has to go sometimes even up to the cabinet or the cabinet committee, the same body which approved the original project. So it's not normal that at the intermediate level someone can decide that now the cost has gone up, so this much funds will be found and we can go ahead. That could also mean a certain delay in going ahead with the project. So decision making gets too centralized, and when there are various ministries involved, there are interministerial issues and all, complications arise. Then comes the question of budget linkage. We work on an annual budget process, and quite often you would have heard that if budget makes a provision, if the funds get released only say in the month of January, December or January or so, there will be questions as to whether one can utilize that much funds in the remaining 2 or 3 months, because we always go by a cut-off limit of 31 March. So in our budgetary process, the indications are there, then probably the various works related to utilizing that budget gets taken up. That takes time, sometimes complications arise. So it's not a very continuing process that funds can continuously be spent. So when funds are there, when the mandate is given, then the required work is taken up, that sometimes may take time, and one may not be in a position to spend the entire amount earmarked for that particular year during that year itself. So in a way it gets shifted to the next year. So this is a big question as far as implementation of projects in our country is concerned, because of the budgetary linkage which one has to be very careful about. A slight difference, the beginning was made as far as the ultra mega power projects are concerned. This, as we know, these are all very big projects of 4,000 megawatt capacity electricity generation. There's something like investment of something like 16,000 crores in each project. So a separate SPV, special purpose vehicle, was constituted to take into account the preliminaries required for taking up a project like this, a huge project like this. And that separate SPV was supposed to take care of appointing consultants, acquisition of land, obtaining coal blocks, obtaining various clearances, including the State Pollution Control Board, etc. So all the preliminary work would be done by an SPV, and then it would go on to the agency which is supposed to implement. So this is one experiment which has started happening. So the question of nobody being responsible and lack of continuity of personnel, people in charge having no project management experience, these are all issues which become relevant as far as implementation of our projects are concerned. Then they quite often heard complaints or problems about time and cost overruns, which is a perennial problem as far as projects in India are concerned. What I have listed here is it's more or less similar statements which one keeps reading or hearing about. How many projects are there? What are the projects? The status of the implementation? What are the types of overruns? The time or cost? And how much it means? Since any number of years, what has been hearing about this? There is some reference to what was reported in for the period 1974 to 79. Then what is meant, the overruns meant. Then how many projects are having problems of time and cost overruns, and how much it is costing additionally to the Government of India. And the latest we have is the January 2012 review of the major projects with the central government monitors, 555 of them, each costing 150 crores or more, distributed in 14 different sectors, with maximum 131 projects being in railways. Railways is a big player as far as implementing projects in the country is concerned. 37 projects were reported having additional delays, and the original cost of the total of these 555 projects, which was 7,13,000 crore, it's expected to go up to 8,34,000 crore. We will know the exact amount only when the project gets completed. But it's already indicated that there are both time and cost overruns. Only 158 projects out of these 555 are on schedule. 233 are already delayed. So that's the status as far as implementation of projects are concerned. And why this happens, there are a whole lot of reasons given for why this type of failure, if one could put it like that, takes place in our country. Why these problems, it starts with the very process of project preparation, various components, elements which should properly be anticipated. That really does not take place. Sometimes one is in a hurry to put together a project, it is done, one seeks approval, and once approval is obtained, then one starts addressing some of these problems. Implementation management itself becomes very poor. Then mobilization in terms of resources, various other requirements. Contract management is a big issue as far as our country is concerned. The capacity to handle, there may be people there, but whether they are the real competent professionals who can manage the projects, that is never taken care of when projects are taken up for implementation. And sometimes short-term political experience also becomes a big issue. So all these contribute to these big problems which we have. Time overruns could be due to inadequate mobilization by contractors. Sometimes it could be law and order problems. Delays in engineering design is a possibility. Change of scope takes place. In recent cases, Maoist problems also have been listed as a problem. Forest environment clearance takes a lot of time. Cost overruns basically due to inflation and fluctuations of exchange rate, high tender value, change of scope. All these reasons get listed as the ones responsible for these two major problems as far as project implementation in our country is concerned. To cite another example, I mean, it's not that everything is a problem as far as the public sector is concerned, and there are no problems when it comes to private sector. Recently, there was a report about this Yamuna Expressway from the Greater Noida to Agra, which is a 165-kilometer long, 11,000 crore project. This was initiated in the year 2001. It could not begin till 2007, following a spate of controversies, and hopefully it is ready for commissioning now. But in the private sector also there are issues. So one has to look at these issues as common problems which we face in our implementation process. And there was a study undertaken by FICCI for the Project Management Institute in 2010. It showed that the projects in infrastructure, energy sectors are seen to have multiple vague ownerships, whereby critical decision making is impacted and projects get delayed, leading to time and cost overruns. However, defense projects are observed to have committed ownerships. So that's one way of looking at things. But any number of studies which have been undertaken have come out with these problems which we face in our scheme of things. Now, why do our projects fail, especially infrastructure projects? There could be a variety of reasons. Some of them have been listed here, and there have been a number of studies. When bulk of the academic literature seems to have concentrated on the discussion of merits and demerits of various economic appraisal methods, relatively little attention has been paid to the more fundamental problem of inadequacy of project preparation practice in developing countries. And this is very fundamental. That's why the emphasis on the entire project planning process. If you could go to an example, a road construction project may not be completed on time at a specific cost due to various reasons. Or if it is completed, it may not be used to the extent anticipated, and even if it is used as expected, it may not help the economy of the rural area for which it was intended. So these are all the fundamentals which have linkages and relevance as far as the planning process is concerned. And even if such a project is considered successful, its benefits may not be shared by the small farmers as was originally designed. So all these issues would come up even when we talk of good project implementation. And the reasons for failure could be further expanded, shortage of resources, unforeseen bottlenecks in the economy, lack of a detailed and efficient implementation plan. It could also be due to bad market research. There could be underestimation of costs. Inappropriate choice of technology could be a factor. Bad design in general could be a factor. Lack of participation and inadequate or no link between project and the stated objectives. All these could be reasons, and these have come out of various studies which have been undertaken which looked at all this. The 2010 FICCI study for PMA again says, experts observe that one of the underlying constraints in project confusion in India is the pressure to quickly begin working on the deliverables. So the importance is on announcing the project, getting political mileage out of that, somehow starting the project, and then one comes to realize the problems, and land acquisition is one of the critical issues. That's why one would strongly advocate a pre-project period where these fundamentals should be addressed, and when the project is really ready to start, then probably the actual implementation should get started. So if we look at the overall scenario, the fundamental point to be emphasized would be better project planning. And when I mean better project planning, the entire stages of the process, the project cycle, which needs to be kept in mind, and at each level, specialists involved learned on the basis of experience and taking it forward on that basis rather than making a haphazard attempt and somehow trying to put a project together without expertise, without expert contribution, without looking into the experiences of implementation, and without linking it with the overall scheme of things, the development objective of the country. So there has been relatively little attention to the more fundamental problem of inadequacy of project preparation practice in developing countries. This is something which emerges out of studies carried out in various countries. There is plenty of empirical evidence to suggest that reasons for failure of development projects in developing countries is mainly related to identification and preparation of projects rather than appropriateness of the methodology adopted. Now, we could look at projects like the Delhi Metro, which is generally reputed to have been done well within the cost indicated, timely completion. So what made a difference is timely availability of funds, there has been necessary political support. Delhi Metro's corporate culture, which emphasizes targets are most sacrosanct, and our dignity is in performing our duty well. So that's how Delhi Metro brought in a different work culture as far as implementation of project and delivery is concerned. The PMI KPMG study for the Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation on project schedule and cost overruns. Various action points have been listed to expedite infrastructure projects, setting up a single window clearance mechanism, setting up a 3-tier project or program management office, modifying the bidding criteria procedures, developing robust process for fast and efficient dispute resolution, reforming India's vocational education training program, developing efficient transport and logistics system, creating an exhaustive list of empaneled vendors at the central level for infrastructure projects, promoting public-private partnership in infrastructure, and promoting joint evaluation of projects designed for value engineering. So these are all listed. So on the whole, there is an awareness that there are problems as far as projects implementation are concerned, particularly in the infrastructure sector. That becomes critical because our rate of growth gets directly dependent on the investment we make in the infrastructure sector, and the progress we make, and the rate of progress, the rate of the growth which the infrastructure sector registers. And as I mentioned, it's a joint endeavor. It's not just the public sector. The private sector also has to come in, and there have to be clear-cut facilitating mechanisms as far as private sector participation is concerned, which is going to be even more important in the scheme of things as far as the new 5-year plan, as the 12th 5-year plan is concerned. I think with that, I could sum up this discussion on the infrastructure projects, their problems, and what needs to be done in our country. I may not have touched upon all the aspects, but the fundamentals have been covered, and I think there are a whole lot of points which emerge out of this lecture. Thank you. Now, maybe we can have questions. First one. Yeah. So we have the first question now. Is the appraisal a kind of review process for project plan? Yeah, this is a question from Mr. Yogendra Linsubur. The appraisal process is essentially required when we decide to take up a project. So as I said, different types of economic financial appraisal. So that sort of strengthens the very fundamental of the project as such, and it's on that basis we decide to go ahead. Now, there could be different situations in the government scheme of things. The financial internal rate of return and the economic internal rate of return, these two become very relevant. There are projects which are generally taken up when the FIRR is very high. It's rarely that projects are taken up when FIRR is low. But if you look at, for example, the metro projects, the FIRR would naturally be low, but the EIRR is very high. So what is socially relevant, those projects also get taken up when it is considered most important as far as that segment of society or that activity in the economy is concerned. So appraisal cannot really be termed a review plan, but it's a fundamental requirement to look at the very process of the process of decision making as far as the project is concerned. Now the next question is, how are cost overruns controlled or can be controlled? What is the process of monitoring cost deviation? This is the question from Prashant Soman. Now, I think I have tried to answer this point. In our scheme of things, we seem to take into account the fact that cost overruns are bound to be there. But the question is, how best that can be anticipated, how best the project design is, how best the planning process has been. And before concluding, I refer to the Delhi Metro project also, which has been, or the first phase or the second phase have been completed within the cost indicated and generally within the time indicated. So there is a way of doing things, and within the overall cost which is indicated, there could be ways of adjusting also. So one could do away with some expenditure which is not really required, and through an efficient contract management process, one could gain control over the entire contract mechanism. And it is possible to control costs, but that awareness has to be there that control at the project management level has to be there, and that has to be taken up as a serious aspect. So, though limited, there are examples that this can be done. Then the question from Pradeep Singh is how long the planning and approval of projects take, and how is the project's relevance forecast, say 3 to 5 years down the line. Now, how long it can take? That's an open-ended question, because there could be projects which are under the planning scheme of things for any number of years. But the broad fundamental guiding point would be what is stated in the 5-year plan and whether it fits into that scheme of things. We have examples where maybe a bright person who mooted a project idea that will not immediately be relevant for the overall scheme of things, but that travels a certain distance and it will not get taken up ultimately because what is considered more relevant in terms of availability of resources, those get taken up. But there are also examples when the plan is under implementation, some new ideas come or some new requirements come, such projects are initiated. So there is nothing laid down as far as the time taken to prepare a project and take it up to a decision process is concerned. That is open-ended and it would take time. There could be time taken during consultations. There could be questions raised about the implementation process itself and the relevance also. Now, second part, how is the project's relevance forecast, say 3 to 5 years down the line? As I said, it would get taken up if it fits into the development objective of the plan as such. Very rarely projects are dropped, but recently there are examples like in the state of Uttarakhand, some hydropower projects have been dropped because the environment lobby became active. So there are instances like that. Now the question is whether that much investment made, whether it should go waste or not, that becomes very relevant. And sometimes if the requirement changes, there could be decision, but then there has to be certain accountability. Now, scheme of things, the system is accountable to the Parliament. There is an audit mechanism, so it becomes difficult to answer questions when the project is taken up and after some time it is discarded. It rarely happens, but as I said, very limited instances are there where they get discarded also, but then there will be a large number of questions to be answered. Question from Dinesh Maurya is how to plan document for project and how to follow these plans. If the question is about preparation of a project report, or the detailed project report, there is a mechanism laid down. Sometimes one depends on the consultants, but within departments or ministries there will be expertise available, and there are any number of models available as to what all details a project document should have, and whoever is familiar with the system as far as appraisal and our scheme of things is concerned, that also comes out with what fundamentals should be there. There are any number of project documents available. International bodies like the World Bank and the UN system, they have their own formats as far as project documents are concerned, and quite often some of them are very helpful because that details what all needs to be stated, the development objective, the immediate objective, the risk factor, the method of implementation, what linkages, sensitivity analysis. All these find a mention in the formats for such documents. In the government scheme of things, unfortunately, I don't think there is a laid down format as such, but since everyone works as part of the system and we are familiar with the appraisal process which the Planning Commission undertakes through the appraisal division which they have, one is generally familiar with what details need to be provided. But even then, there could be instances where much more specific details may not be there, specifications may not be there, and in the process, the cabinet process or the committee's process, those may not really be sought because those are details which would get laid down or which would get followed by the project implementation authority. The next question we have is from Sheikh Pirana, how to tackle contract closure clause in EPC infrastructure project. Now, this would depend upon specific provisions made in a particular document, so I may not be able to comment specifically on that. This again would go by experience and what is learned over a period of time. We have a number of these documents. It has a legal implication. It has been worked out over a period of time. That is where sharing of this experience and the evaluation process becomes very important. Good managers would be able to address this issue very well. Drafting becomes much more important. Generally, there is a feeling that we are not very good or we do not pay enough attention to these specific details when it comes to legal points like this. But there has to be an atmosphere of give and take, and there has to be an understanding. The pre-bid conferences and the like, or the opportunities one has of interacting with those who will be participating in the process. At those levels, these points, to the extent possible, have to be made as clear as possible. Suddenly coming up with a document or a clause, that would lead to problems. So quite often, those entities which have taken up projects or which propose to take up projects will have some experience as to how to address these, what provisions to make, and that should generally be known. It should be a transparent arrangement so that the participating entity also knows what the provisions are going to be. We have a question from Nagendra Kumar. In all government projects, before starting a new project, will there be any religious or honest effort to look in the mistakes done in previous projects, irrespective of place or state it was executed, and if done, how it done? I think essentially one is talking about the lessons learned from experience of implementing projects. Now, World Bank has a very particular system of evaluating each project, not the midterm evaluation, but once the project is complete, post-project evaluation. Once the project is complete, they undertake an evaluation essentially by an independent body, not one who has been associated with the implementation of the project, and those evaluation details are available, and that goes into their store of what lessons have been learned through implementation of a particular project or a program. So that is available. What I have been advocating is that in the case of Government of India or government projects in our country is concerned, we have to institutionalize this mechanism so that we learn on the basis of implementation and the lessons are there, and they get codified, and a person like you who would want to structure a project would have access to that. Similar type of projects when implemented in the country, what problems came up in different types of scenarios, what is relevant for Northeast may not be relevant for the South of India. There could be varying situations. Some places land may be easier to get, some places it would be very complicated. So there are lessons to be learned, and these lessons need to be codified somewhere. And I would strongly argue for a system whereby this sort of documentation is there. It's a vibrant, dynamic system. It keeps getting updated, and it is accessible. And anyone who designs a new project or drafts a project document would go by the experience learned, and he or she would be in a position to say that I have looked at this, and this is the precaution I have proposed in this project document. Then we have a question from Devendra Kumar. He says, I don't see alignments between different government agencies while executing projects at granular level. Just for instance, in cities, municipal committee constructs the road. Immediately after that, BSNL or MTNL comes and digs the road. My question is, why all these government agencies align before they start the project? This is reality as far as we are concerned. There are various missing links as far as our implementation is concerned, and this is a fundamental point. Various local bodies have tried to address this point by laying down that after this particular month, no permission will be given, but then if it's an essential requirement like laying an important line or so, then permission will have to be given. And those bodies deposit a certain amount with the local body so that when their work is over, the required improvement can be brought about. So quite often the funds are deposited with the local body, but the local body cannot really take up in a piecemeal fashion the work related to whatever portion has been done to be set right. There is something lacking as far as this is concerned, and any number of experiments have really not worked. So we have to move in the direction of a codified system whereby these things are laid down, but it's sometimes very difficult to become very rigid because there would be an essential requirement, and that may have to be agreed to. The next question from Navneet Krishnan is, how do you identify a mission or a project that is required? Do you create a business case? Now, again, as I said, the plan objectives would really give an indication as to what needs to be done. But when new missions are introduced, it's a brainwave from within government from somewhere. It could be from the political side, or it could be from the civil service side, which has to be taken up to a political level for a decision. So this comes from somewhere from within the system, or even an outsider may give a proposal, and then someone has to structure it in the form of a project or a mission, and then it gets taken up. It is possible during the plan period, but resource being a limitation, a very huge program may not be possible, but what new things need to be done, that's generally stated in the plan document. We have a point about, please also tell us about who reviews the projects, programs and yojanas. Now, it is, as I said, within the ministry concerned or within the entity concerned, a public sector CMD would naturally be reviewing the progress that organization is undertaking. That ministry responsible for that public sector would be undertaking a review, and the central arrangement is for the Government of India is the Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation, which reviews all the major projects, as I said, 150 crores and above, and that goes up to the Prime Minister or the Cabinet Committee on Infrastructure, giving the project progress. But it takes time for all these details to be collected and to be presented to that body. By the time 3 months, 6 months would easily be over. But the project managing entity itself is supposed to be doing this. Joji Matthew has asked a question: How central monitors the mission and yojana daily, weekly, and monthly, where many of the rural areas are not connected with internet in North India, where funds are utilized without any monitoring person to the sites. Now, every project or mission or a program has a reporting monitoring mechanism. Quite often these days, taking advantage of technology, there is a monthly reporting system. So, if the report gets generated, it travels to different levels, and in some cases, it is even accessible, supposed to be accessible to the public. So, there is a system. Only thing is, to what extent it is a serious exercise, to what extent correctives are applied. That's where we tend to lose quite often. And it's not that one is not aware of the changes which are coming about in terms of cost or time. But then, as I said, the process of doing the correction is so complicated and so lengthy, and the decision levels are so varied that it takes time to bring about the changes. The more effective way of doing would be something like what the Delhi Metro did, managed within the system. And Delhi Metro's board was considered to be competent. They did not have to go to government for each and every decision-making process. And that was a unique arrangement, center plus state working together. Sachin Deshmukh asks, apart from delays in the decision-making and approvals, what are the other reasons for cost escalations in the infrastructure projects? I think I referred to some of these. I don't have to repeat those once again. There are various reasons why the escalations take place, which has been covered. Santosh Chunkala asks, as we see many issues for cost overrun and overtime, are project management concepts implemented? Do you think PMP concepts and expertise would be helpful for the government infrastructure project? If so, what would be the way? The basic idea is to popularize the concept of project management within government. Now, within government, what happens is any person who is a functionary is also asked to implement a project. He or she may not have the requisite skills to look at project management in a professional way. So the idea and effort is to inculcate this concept at different levels. It will take quite some time because government itself has not really fully recognized the need for this. But when examples are given and when the professionals advocate this on a continuing basis, I suppose change would be possible. Sanjay Singh asks, why does government agencies fail to have appropriate stakeholder engagements? Now, this is a question which constantly baffles the government also. The instructions may refer to the need for stakeholder involvement, but it may happen in a haphazard manner or it may happen partially. The problem is how sincere we are in doing these things, and it has to get institutionalized, incorporated in the scheme of things, and citizens also have to be more active as far as participation in these program schemes are concerned. Next question is, how are the lessons learned from failed projects utilized for improvement of future projects? What are the constraints in this? As I said, we don't have an institutionalized mechanism of learning lessons, looking at what went wrong and how to improve things. So it generally goes by the common sense approach, and that's where we seem to require to make a lot of progress as far as professionalizing this part is concerned. Rupali Singh asks, has there been any study to compare the government projects in other countries and what can we learn from them to be able to better manage delays or massive cost overrun or Indian projects? There's no dearth of studies, there are lessons, but then what happens is in the developed economies there is a different way of working things. Once a project is decided upon, it is fully implemented, there are no hurdles, there are no issues and problems which we keep having on a more or less regular basis. So it's a question of the work culture within which we are working. And in our scheme of things, since we are still a developing economy, we are still struggling with all these things, and we have such variety of projects and variety of situations that unless the consciousness about timely delivery and completing the project comes in as a work culture, this is not going to change easily, and lessons are possible. There are lessons from within the country, there are lessons from outside, but the country situation varies. Next question is, thanks for sharing your vast experience, but it is known from government projects there are a lot of red tapeism involved and internal issues being involved. How these can be eradicated or reduced? It's a fact, and as I said, government works on the basis of channels and levels, and individuals do not have that type of stake. So what I would advocate is make project leaders responsible for completion of the project, and that could bring about substantial difference, and that could make a change, and also further delegation of decision making. As I said, even cost escalation matter, if it is approved by the cabinet, it has to travel up the entire link for reaching a decision making level. There's a question about how do you identify a mission or a project that is required? How do you create a business case? I think I have answered this already in the sense that the plan gives an indication as to what is required, and there could be suggestions coming from outside also, even when the 5-year plan process is on. Mayank asks about since infrastructure projects span over a longer period of time in terms of approval and execution, how do you account for inflation and environmental factors when the project is actually ready to start? There is a certain amount of cost escalation which is provided for or agreed to in a project, but going beyond that means it will have to go for decision making once again. Next question is, PPP has been given as a solution to solve many problems facing successful implementation of projects in developing countries. How has been the Indian experience with PPP? I think I have referred to the figures of private participation as far as investment in infrastructure projects is concerned. There has been a beginning in road, power sector, etc. There has been good beginning, but there are other sectors where still a whole lot of work still needs to be done. The model documents have to be ready, a proper mechanism working together, presence of regulators. These are all required. So there has been good beginning, but during the 12th plan it is going to be a major issue, because if 50% of the infrastructure investment has to come from the private sector, there has to be a confidence building environment, the transparency, enough transparency has to be there, and all the required policy, documentation, all this has to be made available, and it has to move fast. Gunjan Maheshwari asks about what are your views about Mumbai Metro project, what are the main causes for delaying this project. This is a good example worth studying where private sector came, and as far as I can recollect, there were problems about clearances by the railways and the highways. So these should have been properly anticipated, incorporated in the project document, and timelines should have been set for this. I mean, that's where something went wrong, and that's where the delays are taking place. But this is also an interesting study in the sense that one generally blames only public sector projects, but even where a private sector has come in, there are problems, and I know the private partner would blame the systems for the delays, the delay in clearances. That's where I would advocate a clear pre-project period when the clearances period should be taken note of, and actual implementation should start after the pre-project period. So Professor Banerjee asked, how can private players be convinced or allured to invest in a low FIRR project and high EARR project? It's going to be very difficult because they'll have to raise the resources in the market. There has to be a certain rate of return. So it's with great difficulty unless there are various linkages provided for. Otherwise, government will have to continue to invest in such projects. How do you manage change management? It has to become a professional culture of project management as far as public sector projects are concerned. Napal asks about most of the government contracts transfer the risk on the contractors. Does this contribute to the project failure as risks are not getting mitigated? There has to be a proper atmosphere of confidence, there has to be give and take, and even contractors will need to be monitored regularly. Again, we could look at the metro examples where the contractors' problems are also appreciated. There are some instances where when the contractors were having financial problems, certain advance was provided. But there has to be clear accountability, and that is taken into account. So our audit mechanisms and all will have to respect these. So there has to be a culture whereby the contractors also get trained, they are oriented, and their work is facilitated, and to the extent required, support is extended, but then they have to perform and deliver, and if they don't do that, there has to be penalization. Dilip asked about how should the conflicting requirements at later stages of project from influential stakeholders be handled. Ideally, a project document would anticipate such factors, either the risk factors or the sensitivities, and there would be a reference to that. But as situation develops, some of these would have to be addressed, and that's where effective project leadership would make a big difference. Why local bodies get private service to monitor the projects, asked Yogi Matthew. It's a decision which the elected local body must be taking. It could be from within, but from within, then there could be a certain amount of distrust whether it's a very thorough process. When you have an outsider doing it, there could be a better way of looking at it. But it depends on the situation in which private agencies are engaged. Sometimes there are professional bodies which do a better job, and you get an outside input to the elected system also as to what is going wrong and what needs to be corrected. The last question is about an irrigation project is yet to be completed 24 years after it began. When inaugurated project cost of 372 crores, how the estimated cost of completion of 13,600 crores of the 6,000 crores has already been spent for such type of delayed project. Now, this again is a case on its own. One should not normally be living with an example like this where it has taken, if it has taken 24 years, it's too much of a period. But one is to look at the factors, whether it really got started, what were the hurdles. Sometimes there could have been some public issues, there would have been agitations. So one has to look at the specific aspect. It will not be proper to comment on a general basis. But what we need to have is a specified project period and the project getting completed within that period. And if it goes beyond that, there should be a certain mandate to go beyond that by whatever number of months and if necessary, minimum number of years. We have to be very rigid about this, we have to be very clear about this, and the project management has to be held accountable for that. That's why we have to have a team which is accountable for the project right from start till the end to the extent possible. But in government systems, the problem is that of retirement, promotions, and shifting and things like that. That also creates an environment whereby one can get away by not delivering what one is supposed to. So one has to draw a line. The project functionaries who can be held responsible for a project, while assigning the task to them, one could take into account their promotion prospects or retirement age and things like that, and accordingly they could be assigned the task. But then they should be allowed to perform also, and they should be held accountable for not delivering, and corrective measures should also be taken where required. Sometimes penalization would be necessary. It's very rarely that we hear about real penalization in that sense. So this is one example where it has taken so much time, but as I said, it will have to be looked into in a specific circumstance. I think with that we complete, we are slightly overshot the time. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Mr. Ramachandran, for your session on why things go wrong in projects, lessons from government infrastructure projects. It was indeed a great session. I would also like to thank all our participants for their support in making this webinar a success. The recording of the webinar will be available on TechGig.com by tomorrow. Thank you all.